Hi, I'm Rosie Clemens. I'm a second year MFA student at UT, and my work will be in the show All Else.
Hi, I'm Pilar Derrickson Garrett. I am a second year PhD in the Department of Art and Art History, and I am writing on Rosie's work for the MFA catalog.
So I came to school 2 years ago as a pretty traditional photographer. Since then, my work has been getting a lot more sculptural, and at this point, I'm really interested in taking digital images and reconstituting them as physical objects. So the work is kind of starting to come off the wall and get a new life of its own.
Okay, so just to kick us off, you mentioned in your opening statement that you came into the program with a little bit more of a traditional digital photography angle, the types of work that you were producing, and that's really shifted over your 2 years in the MFA program. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that transition or that sort of change in your practice and the way that you're approaching digital photography, which is very much evident in the works that you will be showing in the final MFA show.
Yeah, so I think that part of the reason for the change in my work or the direction that it's going in now is just having access to all of the tools and resources and space that we have at UT. I've been using something called a UV printer a lot, which is typically used for advertising or like printing logos onto different materials, but you can print images onto almost any surface using it, and then the ink is cured with UV light. And so I started playing around with printing my images onto a variety of different materials and surfaces. And so part of it was kind of just an interest in like exploring that and seeing what happens when you apply a photograph to a different material, if that changes the meaning of the photograph or not. But I think another part of the reason that I've been exploring this is because I'm just thinking about digital photography in general. And I think we're at like a really interesting point in history with images where I think that we have sort of like a nostalgia for them. Like we want to be able to trust them. We want them to be these like stable, reliable things that like are documents of our past or memories. But I think we also don't trust them because of the advent of AI and Photoshop, CGI, things like that. I don't think that we ever should have trusted photographs because they've always been subjected to the biases and interests and viewpoints of the photographer. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is just the real versus the fake, or like the real versus the fabricated. And I think especially now in the time of AI and CGI, and not being able to trust images, I'm just interested in what a photograph actually truly represents, like a photograph of anything. I mean, I think it's almost impossible. I think it's probably impossible to like truly document anything. Like what's like a real portrait of someone or like an accurate portrait of someone or like even an object. Like you can't photograph all sides of it at once, or you're coming at it from like your own perspective or with your own bias to how you're approaching it. So like it's not proof of anything. But so I think in thinking through that materially or like in my practice, the work has started to become like the object that has been photographed is interacting with the photograph again. And to me, I mean, that's humorous, but I think that there is something in that material interaction that I am curious in exploring, and just looking at the real object versus the photographed object and what is like lost between the two of them or gained. I gave myself a couple of rules for this installation. I wanted to have 10 images, and to me, I would present all of these works by just saying that they're 10 photographs. Because they're printed on different materials, and there's different contexts that are added or removed by that process, but they're still just a photograph printed on a surface, which is the same as printing a photograph on paper, in my opinion. And then, so yeah, I wanted to keep it to 10. And then I wanted to kind of go like through a spectrum of like a very recognizable traditional photograph to something that's maybe barely recognizable as a photograph. And so I think that the work in the show kind of like, I don't know if it's on a linear spectrum, but it does include one traditional photograph that hopefully is kind of like grounding the viewer in like realizing that this is all images, because sometimes they do read almost more like paintings, and then kind of going across the spectrum, but sort of bouncing around it more than like in a linear way of like something that's a photograph, but it's framed with something that it shouldn't be framed with, or it's printed on something it's not normally printed on, or it's like plastered onto a window or something like that. So those were a couple of the rules that I was working with for this install.
I'm Ariana Gomez, and I'm a second-year photography grad student. My work will be presented in the Thesis show this April called All Else.
My name's Maggie Mitz. I'm a PhD in art history, and I'm writing about Ariana's work in the MFA catalog for the show.
My work is more about time and place in relation to family relationships, my family relationship with my dad and my mom, and their relationship to their respective landscapes. So my dad being from Texas with roots in Mexico, and my mom being from Puerto Rico. So I talk a lot about the spiritual trinity of us and our relation between the three of us, and what it means for me and for them in terms of identity and representation. I guess for brief context, my father passed away in 2011, and I did a book about him called The Blue Distance, which is obviously homage to Rebecca Solnit. And when we took the water histories class, I was very much thinking about personifying him, my dad, within a Texas landscape. That project encompassed mostly that. And so in kind of searching for my father in this landscape, I was thinking about how you make a portrait of somebody after they're gone. Especially for me, I didn't have any, I never took many photos of him when he was alive. And so like that sort of weighed kind of heavy on me. So I was thinking about making a personless portrait and how that works. So he became personified through West Texas, which isn't necessarily his landscape, but it's sort of, I found him within that. And so then in searching for him, I kind of found my mom as well as this entity that was like left behind. It's not her landscape. She's from Puerto Rico. So I wanted to focus a lot on what her relationship was to water, to her landscape. Sort of, it was at that time pretty literal, I think. But now it's kind of, I've extricated my dad a little bit more from the conversation. So now she is sort of left present in this space, in this landscape that isn't hers, and how she kind of deals with that and what that means for her. I still see her as this like watery scape, memory scape or landscape. And she talks often about like roots being, you know, like people are rooted into the ground that they have come from before. And it's hard to sort of like pull yourself out of that. So yeah, I still like that dichotomy. I still like having, you know, this deserty look for Texas, but it doesn't have to be so like placed in exact place. I still kind of see this piece as like a whole landscape piece, but also in relation to memory. So my goal is to have someone walk in and sort of see this wall and understand it to be a memoryscape as well. I like the idea of a living archive and sort of contemporary archive. Again, going back to this, like, this will be a memory in 10 years. So what are those, looking at current photos, looking at current lived experiences, in a way of what it will be in the future is interesting. Photography is so based in reality that I think I wanted a grounding image with the understanding, with the sound, and with this, that when you walk in, you understand that you're in a place. You can place yourself in your own place, your own headspace. For me, it kind of makes sense for the person to sort of believe about what their home means. So it's a pretty generic image, I would say, of a house. But the point of it is when you come in and you see this, you're gonna be looking directly through to this wall. This is the entrance that you see. There's only one way to come into this gallery. So this is the entrance that you see, and what you think when you look directly through. And then as you come around, do you feel as if you're entering a space or not, a separate space from maybe behind that, But the home picture, it's maybe giving some secrets away, but the home picture is a photo I took in New Zealand. And so I enjoy that the place doesn't matter, the actual physical, tangible place doesn't matter. I want it, and I'm happy that it's moving more towards this memory place. Archives then played a big role in that because, I never really had home movies. And so I started thinking about home movies as a thing, And so who gets to own those, throughout life, and what that does for a person's sense of stability and understanding of who they are within the world, Photography too, to me, is it's really collaborative. I don't really want to take anything. If I am asking someone for their time and their portrait that I get to keep forever, I need to be just as vulnerable and offer something of myself. And so I think that's sort of where this whole experience, wanting an experience, comes from, is I want to give you my specificity of my family, while also maybe you can talk about yours or understand that, So I like that conversation of having the back and forth.
My name is Irene June, and I am a second-year MFA student at UT Austin in sculpture, and my work is a part of the All Else VAC show coming up.
And my name is Avni Shastri. I'm a second-year MA student in art history here at UT, and I'm writing about June's work for the catalog.
My sculptural practice is my spiritual practice, in that I am using sculpture to mine my ancestral history in Taiwan, mine my trans history, and attempt to answer this question of how do I tend to my dead, and how do I have relationships with my ancestors who I no longer can communicate with, person to person. And so my sculptures become places to meditate, or areas, or as shrines. Coming into grad school, I knew I wanted to explore new materials, and I wanted to see my work in ways that I've never seen it before. So I had to really kind of start from ground zero and look at the research. And so I went into my research, and and by that I mean I looked into the back of my iPhone camera, and I looked at old, I'm looking for inspiration in places relating to my ancestral homes in Taiwan or Dallas or Portland, belongings of my mother or my grandfather. I'm looking into all those things. And so through that research, I landed upon Taiwanese grocery string, particularly for these past 2 years. And so I have, and Taiwanese grocery string is ubiquitous in the landscape of Taiwan. It's used to tie bags of food or tie newspapers together. And so I've been wanting to work with that as a sculptural material because it has so much potential, and see what kind of images I can make, or what kind of forms I can make with such a visually like potent material, because Chinese, like all of my family and stuff, and my Chinese friends and Taiwanese friends, and also like people like who have roots in Africa or in like South America, like people like my professors and stuff have been like, yeah, this is also the same plastic we use in like in their various like countries that they're from. And so it, like beyond Taiwanese grocery plastic, it's just like grocery plastic, right? I realized that there's kind of almost a universality to this material, truly. And so I was really interested in doing that. And so that means I spent the last like 2 years just like braiding and coming up and like tying knots and trying to come up with different ways to work with the material and to use it to aid what I had already started building, like works with plaster or with Taiwanese spirit money. In terms of what sculptures are made out of, I always ask myself like what I want the sculpture to do. For this piece, I knew it had to hang from the ceiling, so immediately I was like, okay, this thing has to be like light, like really, really light. And so the metal I used was really thin within those forms. And the fabric I used is also really light, tulle and like spandex and silk. And because I needed that lightness, I needed that flow. And then for the standing sculptures, there's a lot of plaster, there's a lot of spirit money, there's a lot of grocery string tied into braids or knots, and a lot of wrapping of things with said grocery string. So the materials are really driving the form of the work, honestly. I knew I wanted to utilize this space when I saw that grid at the top of the ceiling. So it's a site-specific piece. In that, I have never had this amount of space before, and I've never had like this much time to work on something. And I'm really good at like grinding things out really like really fast, but to be able to have like so much time and space allowed for work, I think allows me to conceive a work that I've never really thought of before, because I've never seen my work on such a scale like this. I wanted to make a mother for my sculptures that already exist. I wanted to kind of end, and this is like the last thing I'm gonna make in grad school, and so I wanted to make a mother, and I've been thinking about motherhood, and and my nephew was born this week, and so endless. My sister's a new mom, and I've had like a lot of really intense things happen this year, and my mom has really like stepped up and like come to my aid at so many times. And so I've just been really in my mom feels, I guess. And so I wanted to make a mother for my sculptures in the way that, like, if each sculpture is another part of this world that I'm building, then like what would a mother look like if it existed in this world?
Hi, my name is Colleen Blackard, and I'm an MFA student at UT with work in our Thesis exhibition, All Else.
And I'm Allison Augustine. I am a master's student in the art history program, working with Colleen to write for the catalog for this year's Thesis exhibition.
So in my work, it's about capturing the experience of a place that I travel to and weaving it with the memories of that place that I have now to create this other world using printmaking, primarily monotypes.
One of the things I love the most about your work is the process and the relationship between you and the materials and the press bed itself. Would you talk a little bit more about that sort of pressure between it and like the unanticipated products that come out?
Yes, yeah. I really enjoy creating monotypes because there's an unknown in the transfer process. So it's really magical because I'll create my image based on my references and my thoughts and memories and then run it through the press bed, and it creates a mirror image of the work that I intended to make. And it also, sometimes not everything transfers and sometimes more than I want to transfers. And these unknown aspects add a whole lot to the process. So the final result is like a collaboration with the press. And that bit of letting go of control and working with that pressure creates something really unique that I couldn't just do on my own.
Right. And would you say that it's sort of reflective of when we're recalling memories to
Exactly.
right? It's because the impressions are not so representational, but they are enough, and they're sort of teetering on this line of non-representation and representation.
Yes, and that gap kind of lets you fill in the gaps yourself. So you can see the work and not quite know what you're seeing and resolve it in your head. It's not telling you what it should be, but it's letting you complete the process. These works are inspired by my travels last summer to Scandinavia and then to North Germany for an artist residency. So while I was traveling and hiking through Scandinavia, we were in Norway and then in Denmark, and I came across this standing stone in the center of a pine plantation. So it was this monocrop of all these like very strange tall trees, and then in the middle a clearing of this stone in the center, and just walking up to that space felt like entering another realm. So I wanted to capture my experience of the place, not just the landscape that you could visit yourself. Everyone has a different experience of a place, but my own memories of it and the feelings that I had. So it's really kind of trying to capture the energy of that place that I visit. The intent is to create an immersive experience of a forest, but a reimagined memory forest, so that when you walk through the veils, you'll see it from different viewpoints. You'll see the stones through the veils and then turn around and see the image without the stones, and sometimes the image will disappear because it's so transparent, just letting you find your experience within the space. Well, for these pieces, it was about capturing the memory of this one singular stone that I encountered, but in the process of remembering it, it became like a stone alignment, because each version wasn't quite everything for me, so I would make it again. It was kind of like an obsession to just try to get that memory accurate. And in all the different versions that came across, they became something else. And that created this panoramic, almost film-like scene that you can walk through as well. Well, what I like about the monotypes is the surface that they end on isn't tied to the image. The image exists beyond substrate. And so with the ghost print, it's like a second version of it, and I can combine them. There's a little more freedom in the process for me. It's more experimental. I have these impressions and then they leave a ghost, and then I can work with that ghost to create another impression. So some of these pieces are mixed ghosts together, and I let the press create what that final image is, and sometimes it really surprises me. So when I do visit the sites, most of the time it's during the day and hours that you can hike. And so when I revisit them in my memories, it always feels like they're coming out of this dark atmospheric space that resembles twilight. And so that kind of unclear moment when it could be one thing or another, you don't quite know what you're looking at, creates that space for something else to enter. And that's when the magic seems to happen in the printing process, when I'm in that twilight realm and the work comes out of that space.
My name is Mackenzie Drake, and I'm a graduating MFA studio art candidate. And my work is included in our MFA thesis show called All Else. The main framework behind my work is creating of expanses that employ elements of nature and geometric spaces of form to question and to decipher what remains secure amidst an ever-changing world. I think about that through a few lenses of like what becomes an earth without form. What are these spaces that I'm creating, whether it's something entirely lush that's reminiscent of Mississippi, which is the state I moved here from, or the South in general, which is where I'm from, and conceptualizing these like disorienting spaces that reveal and conceal and collapse and become something for the viewer to interact with.
My name is John Simlich. I am a soon-to-be graduating PhD candidate in the art history department. I am going to be writing an essay on Lindsay Drake to be featured in the catalog that accompanies the MFA exhibition.
I think when I started UT, I wanted to examine my questions again. I wanted to consider a lot about like my relationship to the earth. I began with this question of what does it mean for objects or parts of nature or form to be released from gravity. I thought about the figure within those works and how the figure responds to that space, creating a narrative within a work. But since changing the media of my practice, working through oil instead of acrylic, it brought to me a lot more painterly questions that I always had in my mind, but I never fully investigated. Questions about color, questions about the materiality of the paint that I was working with to express these goals. So I think from the time I started UT, I took space to let those questions come to the forefront and not to be scared to push those questions aside, but to investigate them to its fullest extent, whatever that might mean. Yeah, I think a long scope of my practice has been working in both large and small scales. Ones that are smaller and can act as windows into these unfamiliar spaces. They answer different sets of questions. Are they like images that are hard to decipher based off of color or what they become? Are they spaces that are rather larger than the large paintings can decipher? They become worlds in some moments, or interpretations of like the curvature of the earth, or could be curvature of something that's closer to us, but playing those questions. Whereas the larger paintings, kind of what happens when we fully go into those worlds and it becomes a part of our space. It's larger than my physical body, where it, as I'm painting it, I am in it. The triptych is something that has a wide history within painting. And I thought about questioning what that means within this very disorienting environment that I create. What does it mean to create spaces in between that environment for the room, or to have something else breathe within it? Like cutting the painting apart is like an interesting question, while keeping it a singular image, each one operating in its own logic to some extent, but letting it come together as a singular whole. I got questioned early on as to why the figure, why this small figure in a big world, and it made me think about like the figure as a stand-in for the self, but if it's only acting as a stand-in, then why can't myself or another person acting as viewer be a figure within that space? We don't need to cast ourselves onto a figure, but rather experience it from our own perspective, which I think definitely changed how I was considering how the expanses operated for the viewer. I think there are still parts that of bodiliness or of this kind of humanness, of mistake, of like becoming something, or having the work take on a kind of movement that could be bodily to some aspect, which enters the work. But it's really how the work interacts with the viewer, and how my own self can be imbued into the painting to where it takes on the place of figure, but can extend beyond its like limitations.